Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Troy Clayton, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Colonel Mark Hoare. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We also acknowledge the members of the RSL and Services Club Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the ceremony broadcast across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is good by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Thank you. You may be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Thoralf Eugen Carlson. Thoralf Carlson was born in June 1886 in Christiania, Norway, now the city of Oslo. Carlson was one of the many Scandinavians who migrated to Australia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Arriving in Western Australia, Carlson took the English name Joe, and he worked as a labourer in the timber milling town of Mornington Mills. He lived in Australia long enough to become a naturalised British subject. In June 1915, Carlson volunteered for service in the Australian Imperial Force. After a brief period of initial training, he embarked from Fremantle on the transport ship Demosthenes in July 1915. He travelled to Egypt, where he continued his training in the Australian Army camps outside of Cairo. By the end of December, Australian troops had been withdrawn from Gallipoli. Carlson sailed to Lemnos Island to join his unit, the 28th Australian Infantry Battalion. The unit trained on the island and then back in Egypt until March 1916, when they sailed to France and travelled north to join the fighting on the Western Front. The battalion spent time rotating between frontline trenches and rear areas between April and July. During their time in the trenches, the unit experienced heavy artillery shelling and aerial bombardment for the first time. In July, British commanders drew up plans to capture the occupied French village of Pozières and the system of German trenches surrounding it. The men of the 28th Battalion, alongside many others, formed up in the frontline trenches on the evening of the 28th of July 1916. Their preparations were noticed by the German defenders, and the men had to endure a heavy artillery bombardment before launching the attack just before midnight. British commanders expected the preliminary artillery bombardment of the German lines to cut the formidable barbed wire defences. When the 28th Battalion arrived at the first line of trenches, however, the wire was still intact. In the face of heavy German machine gun fire, the men struggled to find or make openings in the wire. Due to the heavy fire, messengers could not relay information about the situation back to Australian headquarters, and orders to withdraw took nearly 2 hours to arrive. During the fighting, Carlson was killed in action. He was 30 years old. In the confusion and continued artillery bombardments of the battlefield, Carlson's remains were never found. Today, he is commemorated on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, one of more than 10,000 Australian soldiers killed in France during the war who have no known grave. In Western Australia, Joe Carlson's friends had the following poem printed in the local newspaper. We think of you, dear comrade, and your name we oft recall. But there's nothing left to answer but your photo, that is all. Private Thoralf Eugen Carlson is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his name listed on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of sacrifice and service told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Thoralf Eugen Carlson, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we shall remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub of Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We'd like to thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.